Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very special event. We ask that you turn off mobile phones and please do not take flash photographs. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Sydney Opera House for our very special event this afternoon with Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, AC, the Chairman of the National League for Democracy. I'm Anne Mossop, the Head of Talks and Ideas at the Sydney Opera House, and it's our great pleasure to present this event with our partners, the University of Sydney and the University of Technology, Sydney, as part of our Ideas at the House series. As Joy said, can I please ask you to put your mobile phones on silent if you haven't already, and to remind you that this event is being filmed and live streamed, and that the Twitter hashtag is Aung San Suu Kyi. I'd like to welcome all of you here today, and especially the members of the Burmese community and our distinguished guests. In a breach with traditional protocol, I would like to start by welcoming first those who have travelled furthest to be here. Dr. Tin Ma Aung, U Thein Sui, U Mo Zau U from the National League for Democracy, and Bronte Moles, our Australian Ambassador to Myanmar. We're also very happy to have here Senator the Hon. Brett Mason, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, who's representing the Prime Minister at this event, Malcolm Turnbull, the Minister for Communications, Tanya Plibersek, the Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Gillian Skinner, New South Wales Minister for Health and Medical Research, the Honourable Brad Hazzard, New South Wales Minister for Planning and Infrastructure, and Mr Mark Speakman, SC, New South Wales Parliamentary Secretary for Tertiary Education and Skills. And on stage, of course, we're joined by Burmese musicians from the ensemble Lokanat. Today is a special occasion, and I just wanted to let you know what you will be seeing this afternoon. We'll be seeing the conferral of honorary degrees by the University of Technology Sydney and the University of Sydney, with some of the formalities that is part of a traditional degree ceremony. This will include the citation for each degree, which is the formal statement of why the universities wish to honour our very special guest. This will be followed by an address by Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, and she will then be in conversation with journalist Hamish MacDonald. We hope there will be some time for questions from the audience, but we know that you are all here to listen to our guest as much as anything else. There will be microphones in the audience for those questions, and I would encourage anyone who wishes to do so to ask a question, something that has an answer, and something that is reasonably brief, to allow for as many people as possible to be part of the conversation. To commence proceedings, I would now like to invite the Chancellors and Vice-Chancellors of the University of Sydney and the University of Technology Sydney to the stage. Professor Vicky Sara, AO, Chancellor of the University of Technology Sydney. Belinda Hutchinson. Belinda Hutchinson, AM, Chancellor of the University of Sydney. Professor Ross Milbourne, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Technology Sydney. And Dr Michael Spence, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Sydney. And now I'd like you to join me in welcoming Daw Aung San Suu Kyi to the stage. I would now like to ask Professor Shane Houston, Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Indigenous Strategy and Services at the University of Sydney, to deliver a welcome to, an acknowledgement of country.
Chancellors, Vice-Chancellors, honoured guest, it is my privilege to offer an acknowledgement of country this afternoon. Many people might ask the question, why in a city the size of Sydney would we bother to acknowledge the spirits and people of this land, the custodians of this land? Surely they are so far away and so long ago. But anyone who has taken the time to speak to Aboriginal people in Sydney and to think about and study the history of this great city would understand that on a daily basis, tens of thousands of Sydney-siders walk across lands that have been part of Aboriginal history for tens of thousands of years. George Street, Botany Road in Redfern, the Pacific Highway, are all tracks that were made by Aboriginal people over tens of thousands of years. And when the colony arrived, they simply put bitumen over the top. So next time you walk down Sydney, down the main street, George Street, remember that you're walking along a way that Aboriginal people have passed along for tens of thousands of years. Some might think that an acknowledgement of country is a perfunctory, a rather mechanical thing, but it is not. It is deeply rooted in our culture. In our culture, when we moved from our own country to somebody else's, we would always seek permission, let spirits know, let people know we were coming. Sometimes we would throw rocks. And our hosts would welcome us to country and wish us a safe journey. So on behalf of us all, we would like to offer an acknowledgement of country to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose lands we meet, one of 29 clans of the Eora Nation whose country was bounded by the Hawkesbury River, the Georges River and the Nepean River. On your behalf, I seek to acknowledge their continuing presence on this land and seek their permission to enjoy a safe and prosperous journey across this great city. Thank you.
I'd now like to ask the University of Technology Sydney's Chancellor, Professor Vicky Sara, to present the University of Technology Sydney's honorary degree.
Dear friends and colleagues, and particularly members of the Burmese community, it is indeed a pleasure as Chancellor of the University of Technology Sydney to be here today to honour Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. There are thousands of us gathered here in the wonderful concert hall of the Opera House, and there are many millions more around the globe watching this historical event streamed live on the internet. We are all most fortunate to be part of the global community of hope inspired by Aung San Suu Kyi, one of the world's great advocates of human rights and democratic freedom. In a very short ceremony this afternoon, before Daw Aung San Suu Kyi addresses us, UTS and the University of Sydney will bestow upon her honorary degrees from their universities. Honorary degrees are awarded to individuals whose lives and actions, whose words and deeds enshrine the highest ideals of humanity, who expand and enrich our knowledge to change the way we act and how we perceive the world, and to inspire us, to make us think, to make us question, and to make us change. There could be no more fitting candidate for these awards than Aung San Suu Kyi. UTS originally awarded this degree in 1996 in recognition of Aung San Suu Kyi's international leadership in the defence of democratic freedom. Unable to leave Burma to accept the degree, Aung San Suu Kyi wrote a statement which was read out by her late husband, Dr. Michael Aris, at a ceremony at UTS in 1997. And I would like to quote a little from that. "Without education, we can achieve nothing of value. It is for this reason that good institutions which seek to expand human knowledge and to uphold high standards of scholastic endeavour represent a beacon of hope for those who are experiencing the evils of a lack of a good education. Our struggle for democracy is also the struggle to assert our right to a genuine education. Today, Aung San Suu Kyi, we have indeed come a full circle. We can honour you here in the presence of your global family in Sydney, because you are that beacon of hope, because you have fought for your people and their rights, because you are an inspiration and an emblem of courage, of intelligence and strength, and most importantly, because now you are free. And for this, we are particularly thankful, because we seek to inspire our students, who are tomorrow's leaders. We seek to inspire them to crave knowledge, to stand up for what is right, and to go out and make a difference. I know I can't do justice to Aung San Suu Kyi's extraordinary life story, but briefly I would reflect on a very few aspects to remind us of just what a truly remarkable figure of our time she is. When she was just 2 years old, Aung San Suu Kyi's father was assassinated, having spent his life fighting for Burmese independence. To turn that incredible hardship into a lifetime's commitment to fighting for freedom, like her father and her mother, is truly inspiring. Having spent some decades abroad, particularly India and the United Kingdom, where she graduated from Oxford University, she built a career and a family, Aung San Suu Kyi returned to her home of Burma in 1988. And as many of you from the Burmese community here today know much better than I, Aung San Suu Kyi returned to a country in the grip of a brutal military regime, where mass slaughtering of protesters was the regime's response to calls for democracy. Showing great courage in opposing the powerful military junta, she travelled Burma as a leader of the National League of Democracy, speaking to large crowds in support of democracy. In July 1989, she was placed under house arrest, and it would be more than 2 decades before her freedom was fully restored. Throughout those years, she continued to make her views clear, speaking fearlessly to the Burmese people about what she called Burma's second struggle for independence. Her leadership and her courage have galvanised the support of democratic countries and human rights groups around the world, earning her many awards for her work, most notably the Nobel Peace Prize in October 1991. UTS, I believe, is a very special institution. UTS is a university deeply committed to social justice. In our own humble way, we are delighted to be part of the global recognition of your contribution to humanity. Today, as a global community, we unite with you in the hope that you and all the Burmese people will soon enjoy the same right to freedom as we enjoy here in Australia. To Aung San Suu Kyi, I invite you to stand and to receive the UTS Doctor of Letters honoris causa from the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Ross Milbourne.
I would now like to invite the University of Sydney's Vice-Chancellor, Dr. Michael Spence, to present the University of Sydney honorary degree.
Mingalaba Kamya. Yakulo Gabaga, Gompulezade, Guangzangji. Aung San Suu Kyi ne Myanmar lumyozu miago toyada atu wamyal gom yubade. Sydney tekatoka Myanmar pi pinya yene tutatana miadwin lene swa pawin le tue sangwe twapa me. When members of the Burmese community suggested that I might stumble my way through some opening words in their mother tongue, I was inspired to do so by watching a YouTube video of you, Aung San Suu Kyi. I watched you accept an award of the Légion d'honneur from the French government in impeccable French. But I was even more inspired by the words of a Burmese patriot that had been written underneath the video. The Burmese patriot says, "She sounds wonderful in any language." And the story of her life is an example to the people of every tongue. Well, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's fitting that we come to this unique and magnificent place to honour the work of a remarkable woman. That we do so with UTS jointly expresses the importance of the occasion to both our universities. The last time we held a joint degree ceremony was to honour another inspirational global leader, Nelson Mandela. During her lifetime, Aung San Suu Kyi has dedicated herself to the struggle of the Burmese people, standing resolutely through bitter detainment for the principles of equality and of democracy. She's fought against domination. She's cherished the ideal of a society in which people live together in harmony and in equality. Today, we honour that ideal, and we honour the sacrifices that you have made in its pursuit. But in doing so, it's not just your sacrifices that we honour. We also honour those who are not named here individually, but whose unshakable grasp of the ideals that you so simply and eloquently embody have helped us keep believing that freedom will prevail. Some of those people now live in Australia, and they are, as members of the Australian Burmese community, committed to working with all Australians for the good of our two countries and to deepen the friendship between them. My friends in the Australian Burmese community tell me that it's difficult for them to express in words, either in Burmese or English, just how they feel about seeing you in this country. And I know that many of you have travelled from as far afield as Perth and Darwin to be with us today and to help us to honour this remarkable citizen of your country. But not just of your country, this remarkable citizen of the world. And that you've come here too to help us celebrate your aspirations for the land of your heritage and for the future of people who love freedom everywhere. Many of you, I know, have made your own sacrifices in supporting Aung San Suu Kyi's cause for a Burma that's free of tyranny, for a Burma that can finally reach its enormous potential. Aung San Suu Kyi, the University of Sydney is committed with you in working towards a more prosperous and happy Burma. Our Sydney Southeast Asia Centre has 220 academics working across 13 faculties and represents one of the highest concentrations of regional expertise in the world. Its work in Burma covers fields as diverse as economic and social development, environment and resources, health, heritage and the arts, and state and society. In each of these areas, we are, like you, keen to see Burma flourish and hope to be a very small part of the exciting developments that are happening in your country. Many of our projects touch on issues central to the work of the parliamentary committees that you chair. Aung San Suu Kyi, the world knows the story of your father, Aung San, who negotiated Burma's independence from the British Empire in 1947 and who gave his own life for a strong and free Burma. In accepting your Nobel Prize last year, you said that you were engaged in the struggle for your father. You said you were happy for everyone to see you as your father's daughter, but that you were concerned that you may not be worthy of him. Well, there can surely be little doubt that after an exemplary life thus far, lived in the service of others and in search of the highest ideals, you've proved yourself loyal and worthy both to your father and to your people. So, Chancellor, it's a great honour to present Aung San Suu Kyi, especially in the presence of so many Burmese Australians who've joined us to recognise and celebrate her achievements. She'd made enormous sacrifices for her country, enduring separation from her husband, her children and other loved ones, and also being denied that freedom for 15 years. Despite the efforts of those who sought to curtail her influence, she's had a profound impact on events in her homeland. She continues to make a positive contribution to political processes in Burma, but most of all, for us, she is an inspiration for those who love freedom around the world. So, Chancellor, I have great pleasure in presenting Aung San Suu Kyi for admission to the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa, and I invite you to confer the degree upon her.
Aung San Suu Kyi, it is my great pleasure and honour to be here as the Chancellor of the University to wholeheartedly endorse the sentiments of the Vice-Chancellor. I know I speak on behalf of everyone here and everyone watching on the live stream in congratulating you and celebrating your life's achievements. This degree is as much about the history of your inspirational leadership as it is about looking forward. We hope you will leave Australia looking forward in the knowledge that you have friends and supporters here with a strong desire to further strengthen the relationships between the people of both countries and to support the future development of Burma. Both universities today seek to work in education, in health, in human rights, in agriculture, with government and non-government organisations in Burma just to do this. You once said that you hope we will all be there to support the building of your country inch by inch. Both universities are here today to publicly state that we will be with you and your people every inch of the way. We all wish you every continuing success for your future endeavours and the endeavours of your fellow countrymen and women. And in the name of the Senate and by my authority as Chancellor, I invite you to stand to accept the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa.
Thank you to our University of Technology Sydney and University of Sydney colleagues. This now concludes the ceremonial part of our event this afternoon. So we now move on to the next part of this event this afternoon, where we will be hearing an address from Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, and we will also have the pleasure of hearing her in conversation with journalist Hamish MacDonald. Hamish is a distinguished Australian journalist, foreign correspondent, who has been Young Journalist of the Year at the Royal Society Television Awards in 2008 and has reported for Channel 4, Al Jazeera English and Channel 10. Hamish will be discussing matters that come out of her address, but will also be opening the floor to you for your questions. You will have seen that previously that there are microphones in the audience. Also, that given that we have an audience behind us today as well, there are a couple of microphones there, so that we hope that there will be a little bit of time at least for you to join the conversation. I'd now like to invite Hamish MacDonald to come to the stage, and he will introduce Daw Aung San Suu Kyi's address. Hamish MacDonald.
And thank you very much, and thanks everyone for coming today. I'm sure I share your feelings in being very honoured to be here to witness all of this. There's not really any further introduction required, but I do need to remind you that at the end we'll have about 10 minutes for questions, and please do make them questions. We've got a short opportunity here, so put a question mark at the end. There are very few humans walking on this planet who have the moral authority of the woman that we're about to begin a conversation with. Please welcome Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. Thank you so much. So I was listening to an interview that you did not that long ago, and you said that you didn't really like melodrama. And I reflected on that, and I thought, for someone that doesn't like melodrama, you've led a pretty melodramatic life. How do you reflect on that?
Well, perhaps because of that, I don't like melodrama. Besides, I find it very embarrassing. I think I'd just like to be an ordinary human being.
The reality is, though, nobody in this room sees you as an ordinary human being. How do you put that in the context of your own life and your own ambition?
I suppose I take life as it comes. I do have my goals, I have my ideals, and I have very, very firm principles. But I hope I'm flexible enough not to be bound by them, not to be shackled by them. But when I say I take life day to day, it doesn't mean that I don't have long-term plans, but that I accept that things can change from day to day. And that keeps things in perspective. You're always aware of the fact that nothing is forever. For example, as a politician, some are very much swayed by popularity, by public applause. But I think one also has to understand as a politician that this might not last forever, and that helps you to keep things in perspective.
I'm interested to understand your views on leadership and power. As someone that has exercised enormous leadership without tangible, formal power, how necessary is formal power?
Formal power is necessary if you want to change the course of a country's history. And we have to be practical. There are things that a government can do which the opposition cannot do.
But you have exercised great power and authority in your home country without being in that position. How have you managed to do that?
I think simply by being honest with the people. when I say we, I mean my party, the National League for Democracy, and we've never tried to win the support of the people by making false promises or by distorting facts. We've always tried to be as honest as possible. Some people think that honest politics is a contradiction in terms, but I think it's an absolute necessity. It's just the simplest way to do things in the long run.
Does it surprise you that so much of politics has an air of dishonesty about it?
Well, I'll tell you something. During my visits abroad, I won't mention the names of the countries, but during my visits abroad, I have been told by journalists and by others that they were surprised because I answered their questions. So I said, well, if you ask questions, I answer them.
We're very grateful for that.
But they said, no, politicians don't do that. They come with answers that they've already decided to make. And whatever the questions are, these answers are the ones you get.
I'm interested in your relationship with your father. You were, I think, 2 years old when he was killed. But you do have a relationship with him today. His picture adorns the walls in your office. Can you describe that relationship that you as an adult have with your father?
Well, I think I'll have to start with how it was when I was a child. I think my mother was anxious that I should not forget him. I was also his favorite child, that means a lot. Everybody knows that. And I was always told that I was his favorite child, that he loved me best. And that was always a great strength to me, although I couldn't remember him at all. The conviction that I was my father's best loved child was a great source of strength for me. And the fact that I was not allowed to forget him, not in a nasty way. I think my mother just did not want me to think that I never had a father. So he was very, very alive for me throughout my growing years. And so he remains alive to this day, but now not just as my father, but as my political leader.
Before we continue this delightful conversation, I know that Dao Su has some formal remarks that she was going to make.
I'm terribly sorry.
It doesn't matter. I'm quite happy not to make formal remarks.
I should have pointed you in that direction, I think.
Well, all right. You'd better tell me how many minutes I'm supposed to devote to these formal remarks.
Absolutely as you wish.
No, I can't do that. There's an audience as well. Now,
5 minutes? Yeah. Would you prefer to give more time to the question and answer?
now, how much time do you want for your questions and answers?
I think they want a lot. So
how much time do we have left? Let's do it the democratic way. How much time do we have left?
Well, let's make this a democratic process.
All right.
We'll let the audience vote. We've got 57 minutes left.
Right.
Would the audience be happy with, say, 10 minutes of formal speaking, and then we'll return to the conversation? All those in favour? I think that's democracy in action.
The shorter the speech is better. Now, first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for your tremendous support. I would like to say that throughout our years of struggle, we have been encouraged by friends from all over the world. The honorary degrees, which were presented to me earlier, these were not just honorary degrees. These were signs that the world was with us, that we had not been forgotten in our struggle. And for this, I would like to thank all of you in Australia and all over the world. Now, the subject I had chosen to speak on formally for the next 10 minutes is Burma's future. Not Burma's future as predictions or even Burma's future as hopes, but for Burma's future as choices, the choices that we have to make for the future of our country. Now, as I said earlier, I'm a politician. I'm practical, I hope. I'm pragmatic, and I try to be honest. So I want to talk about the choices that we have made, we, the National League for Democracy and our supporters, with regard to the future of our country, and to ask for your support to help us make sure that these choices can be made as soon as possible. The very first choice that we made with regard to our future was more than 20 years ago when we opted for democracy. Even when there was a very, very brutal, one has to be honest, military regime in power, we never let go of that choice. We were going to opt for democracy, the kind of democracy that was rooted in strong institutions and in respect for human rights. But along with our dedication to democracy and human rights, we never forgot the need for national reconciliation. So these were the three pillars of the National League for Democracy: democracy, human rights, and national reconciliation, because we did not want either of those three pillars to be built up at the expense of any of the other two. These three we need, that our country might be the kind of union of which we had dreamed for very many decades. Those of our leaders who fought for independence, including my father, dreamt of such a union. They wanted to see Burma as a union of many peoples who were strong in their dedication to the idea of a nation that worked together for its people, that was bound together by dedication to the best principles of nationhood. We decided to follow that path. This was a choice we made. I have often said that I find it embarrassing when people talk about the sacrifices that I have made, and I always try to point out that those were not sacrifices but choices. Throughout my life, I feel I have made the choices that I thought were best. I may have been wrong, I may have been right, but those choices were mine, and I would bear responsibility for them and accept whatever consequences came thereby. So those were the choices we made back in 1988. In 2012, last year, we had to make another choice. We had to make the choice to contest the by-elections and to work as far as possible together with the existing system to carry on with our quest to realize democracy, human rights, and national reconciliation. When we contested the elections, we had an election platform built on three main planks, which were rule of law, internal peace, and amendments to the Constitution. Rule of law, because for very many decades, Burma had been under authoritarianism, which knew nothing about rule of law. It knew a lot about law and order, but that is quite different from rule of law, especially as law and order translates very unhappily into Burmese. Now, the literal translation is Nyeng Wip Pi Bia, which means quiescent, crouched, crushed, and flattened. Now, I don't want our people to be crouched and crushed and flattened. I want them to be able to lift up their heads in the security of rule of law. So, rule of law is very important for our country, especially because we have hardly any judiciary to speak of. We have a judiciary which is totally limited by the Constitution, which places it under the authority of the executive. The second plank of our election platform was internal peace. That is to say, an end to ethnic conflict, internal conflict. I think that I hardly need to explain why we want peace, why we want an end to all internal conflict. That is necessary if ours is to be a truly peaceful and strong union. Then the third plank was amendments to the Constitution. Some may ask why. Because this Constitution is preventing our country from becoming a truly democratic nation. Those of you who think that Burma has successfully taken the path to reform would be mistaken. If you want to know why you're mistaken, you only have to study the Burmese constitution. Not a pleasant task, I can tell you. But if you read it carefully, you will understand why we cannot have genuine democracy under such a constitution. I usually mention just one point about it because that drives home its lack of democratic principles far more effectively than going through a number of other sections. The provision for amendments to the Constitution is, I'm told, about the most rigid to be found anywhere in the world. In order to make any major amendment, more than 75% of the members of the legislature must vote for it. That's just the first step. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware that 25% of the members of the legislature are from the military. That means that in order for the Constitution to be amended, the members of the military, I always say at least one brave soldier, but actually more than one, because we don't have the full quota of 75% civilian elected representatives. So the military must support any amendment of any consequence for it to go through. This is not all. All the military members are appointed by the Commander-in-Chief. He alone decides who the members are going to be. Not only that, they can be changed at any time. They are not appointed for the lifetime of the Parliament. So the Commander-in-Chief at any time can decide who represents the military in the legislature. And that means, in effect, that the Commander-in-Chief decides whether or not the Constitution can be amended. Because if he says yes, then the military representatives will vote yes. If he says no, then they will vote no. So I put this to you very simply. How can you call a constitution democratic when it can be amended or not amended in accordance with the will of one man who is in an unelected post? Because the Commander-in-Chief is not there by election. Now, this is just the beginning of a series of sections in the Constitution which make it totally undemocratic. If Burma is truly to be on the road to democracy, we have to amend this Constitution. Now, that has taken me... Now, my time is almost up, so I will just conclude by saying that in recent months, my party has been conducting public meetings all over the country to acquaint our people with this issue. First of all, what a constitution is. Secondly, how it affects the lives of every one of its citizens. Thirdly, the history of our constitutions. We've had 3. This is the 3rd one. How this one was adopted, how this one was written up, and why it is not democratic, and why we want it amended. And we have found that the moment our people understand what is really at stake, the great majority of them, I would say that at the public meetings, we find that more than 80% of them are very much in favor of constitutional amendment. Now, don't think that the remaining 20% or so are against amendment. What those people want is a total rewrite of the Constitution. So, this is our choice for Burma's future. A genuine democratic constitution that will help us to uphold democracy, human rights, and we want to achieve these amendments through national reconciliation, never forgetting that all our citizens belong to our country, and the whole country belongs to all our citizens. It's not just the military that owns a country, and we do not want the military to be left out either. We want everybody in our country to be part of the process that will take us forward to genuine democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorsu. Can I pick up on the point of the military? You also have, as well as this relationship with your father that we were just discussing, a relationship with the military. And you said that you love them, they're part of your family, you're part of their family. Can you explain that a little further? Because I suppose given what we know of what the military has done to you, that's difficult for many of us to understand.
Well, first of all, the Burmese army was founded by my father back in 1941. And it was first founded as the Burma Independence Army to fight for Burma's independence. So my father is recognized as the father of the Burmese army. Difficult for them to forget that. So I don't think it was. It came as something particularly pleasant to them when I decided that I much prefer democracy to military dictatorship. But this is not because I do not love the army. I was brought up to love the army in the same way in which I was brought up to love my father. I always knew that my father was the founder of the Burmese army. In fact, most of the photographs, existing photographs of him, are of him in army uniform. So I've always thought of him as a soldier, as a member of the military. Because of that, it was difficult for me not to love the army, besides which my mother always said that all soldiers were my father's sons, and therefore my brothers. This is how I was brought up.
Is it difficult, though, to love somebody or an organisation that sees you as a threat?
Well, what is more important is that they should love me. So it's not difficult for me to love them. I hope they find it a little easier to love me.
Can I ask about your views on sacrifice? Everybody here is aware of the enormous personal sacrifices that you have made. How do you explain them on a personal level?
Well, as I said earlier, I don't think of them as sacrifices. These were choices I made. Because what exactly do you mean by a sacrifice? It's giving up something. But if you're giving up something for something that means more to you, then it's not really giving up, is it? It's a choice.
And do you talk about that with your sons today?
I talked about them a long time ago. Not with my younger son, who was a little bit young then, but I did say it to my oldest son, my eldest son, when I was about to go into politics in Burma. I did discuss this with him. And at that time, he said, yes, it was a good thing to do because he thought that Burma needed politicians like me.
But I suppose many of us grow up thinking, believing, maybe knowing that we're the most important thing in our parents' world. You're essentially saying to him, you're not. So can you explain that for us? How do you tell that to a child?
I just put it to him very straight that I think that I should be involved in politics because we were all trying to achieve something that was greatly needed for our country, a change in regime, a change from dictatorship to democracy, a change from a repressed society to one where the people were free to shape their own destiny. And that I thought I should be involved because I was a citizen of this country.
And does that involve a degree of single-mindedness? Do you have to be completely focused on that in order to not let the emotion get in the way of it? Or is there a big pool of emotion around all of these issues?
I think you do have to be single-minded under the circumstances under which we had to work. Because it wasn't exactly like Australian politics.
It can be pretty nasty here too.
Well, I didn't say that. But you have to be single-minded. I think it's not just me. I think in many ways I had it easier than many of my colleagues because going back to the army, when all is said and done, I don't think they ever forgot that I was my father's daughter because they treated me well. Yes, they placed me under house arrest, but that's not the same as being put in prison. And I think there are many people here in Australia, many people from Burma who have been in prison. In fact, I've come with a team of 4 altogether with me. And out of the four of us, 3 of us have been in prison because of our political views. So many of my colleagues who were in prison suffered terribly, suffered physical hardship, suffered a lot of mental cruelty, and they had it much, much harder than I did. So I really don't have much to complain about. I think if they can be single-minded, and they were single-minded, they could be single-minded, I don't see why I couldn't have been.
Were there moments where you thought maybe the choice or the sacrifice, as we might interpret it, is not worth it? I miss my children so much.
No, I never thought that it was not worth it. I always used to think that if only one other person remained in Burma who wanted democracy, I would remain.
Can you articulate for us where in the democratisation process Burma, Myanmar is today? Because I think by you being free and being here, many people interpret that to mean that Burma now has democracy, but that's not really the case.
Well, I think people have very short memories. You must remember that in 2003, I think many of you will have forgotten, so I will have to remind you that in 2003, when I was traveling in Upper Burma, in central Burma, my motorcade was attacked by, I suppose I could only call them thugs because they were armed with staves and knives, and they attacked our motorcade. And then we were arrested. It was a rather unusual situation. Those who were attacked were arrested, and the attackers got away, I don't know where, scot-free anyway. And so after that, I and others in the motorcade were imprisoned, and there was a great international outcry. I think because of that, because of the indignation of the international community, this happened at the end of May 2003. In August, a 7-step roadmap was declared by the then military government. Now, it included such things as drafting the constitution and then having a national referendum to adopt it, and then holding elections. And then the elected government would bring democracy to the country. Now, we are now at number 7. The elected government, elected through elections in 2010, and we've always questioned the freeness and fairness of that election. And I have to say that even the United Nations, which is very, very cautious about what it says, admitted that those elections were deeply flawed. And so this present government, which is in power through the 2010 elections, is carrying out the 7th part of the roadmap, which is by which the government will bring Burma to what they described as disciplined democracy. Now that's very suspect. So what we want is genuine democracy, not one that is imposed by the government, but one that comes up from the people. And in order to do that, we need the constitution amended.
Specifically, in what way? Because you can't be the president at this point.
No, not just that. As I said, to begin with, how can you call the constitution amended democratic? That can be amended only by one person. One person against all the elected representatives of the people can decide whether or not amendments can be made. Now, about whether or not I can be president, it's not whether or not I can be president, but because the constitution was written specifically to prevent me from being president, I object to this, because no constitution should be written with one person in mind. That's not democratic.
Let's be very clear, though, you do want to be the president after the 2015 election.
Oh, yes. I would like to say why I want to be president. I've explained that often enough, but there's one point that I usually forget to make, but it's important. My wishing to be president is very simple, so that we can do what our party will be able to implement the policies that we think are necessary for the country. But I also want to be president for the sake of all those who have really sacrificed everything, including their lives, for democracy in Burma.
The increasing level of responsibility that you have, you are now an MP, you're engaged in this process, that does bring about or force compromise. How do you go with compromising with these people?
There's nothing wrong with compromise, provided it's principled. I've often said that we need to build up a culture of democracy. It's not just democracy as a political system. We need to build up a culture of democracy. And that involves negotiated compromise. And we are very weak at that because we have had too many years of dictatorship.
I'm interested in this because I heard an anecdote from you where you talked about having friends around for dinner in the UK, in Oxford, and you wanted to make Peking duck, and you got the hairdryer out to crisp the skin. Now, to me, that is someone that's a perfectionist. Are you a perfectionist?
Yes, I suppose so. I would quite like perfect democracy for Burma, as perfect as it is possible in this human world.
Yeah. So you go into this political process.
But actually, it wasn't a hairdryer, it was a fan.
Are you already having to make compromises, though? I know you're saying that you can do them in a principled way, but are you having to make those compromises?
But I've always made compromises. I think that's what democracy is all about. The NLD, when it was first founded, it was founded on compromise because it was founded by 3 different groups. So I don't think there's anything wrong with compromise, especially as long as I said, it's principled compromise.
You've been in Singapore, you've met with global CEOs of some of the biggest companies in the world. What do you say to them? Do you say, come and do business in Myanmar, come and do business with the military leadership? Or do you say, come, try and do business, but tell them that you want change too?
We've always said that what we believe in is responsible business. Now, I was discussing this with the Burmese community earlier, and they talked about the fact there was a question in which it was said that everybody is talking about transparency in Burma these days, and is there really real transparency? And I explained that transparency and accountability were first used by our party, the NLD, back in the days when it was highly unpopular and almost considered high treason to talk about good governance. But we talked about transparency and accountability, and we started talking about responsible investment very early on. In 2010, after the new government came into power, I think the emphasis was on investment. And there were no conditions that we were aware of attached to it, whereas we always said responsible investment, which would be as much for the benefit of our people as for those who are investing. Of course, we accept that investors come to invest because they hope to profit from the situation, but we want to make sure that our people benefit as well.
But how honest are you being with these CEOs? You must know about how rife corruption is. You tell them.
They should know. If they don't know that Burma is corrupt, they have no right trying to invest there.
I know you've been here today. Are you aware of the number of Burmese or Rohingya refugees coming to Australia?
Yes, I know this is a big global issue these days, and it's a difficult one for us. And I would like to echo what Bill Clinton said, the retired president of the United States, when he was in Burma recently, that the world has so much goodwill towards our country, but they were sickened by the resolution of differences through violence. I feel that he's very right. What we want is a society where differences can be settled without violence. My party is totally dedicated to non-violence. Violence has been committed against us again and again, repeatedly, not over a year, not over 2, but over nearly 30 years. But we never retaliated with violence. So I'm unhappy that there should be those in my country who believe that differences can be settled only through violence.
But you know only too well the impact of violence on people's lives. Some people have chosen to try to come to Australia. Do you think we have an obligation to accept those people, to offer them a new home?
That is your policy, but what I would like to say is that the government of my country has an obligation to protect everybody in it, that they must make sure that there is rule of law that will give everybody security. We cannot have peace without security. I have said repeatedly that unless our people all feel secure, you can't expect them to sit down and sort out their differences. People who are afraid of being killed, or who are afraid of their property being attacked, are not going to sit down and talk sensibly to one another. And I do not think that the government has been responsible enough in establishing rule of law.
I think you're referring to the situation in relation to the Rohingyas particularly.
All over the country, I think there's a tremendous lack of rule of law. We do not have an independent judiciary. It is very much under the executive in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. And we do not have the kind of independence among the different departments and at the local level, and independence and transparency and accountability. Yeah. We do not have these, and without that we can't have rule of law. And without rule of law we cannot expect our people to settle their differences peacefully and sensibly.
There are those in recent months that have expressed criticism towards you and have expressed disappointment that you have not been more vocal in relation to the Rohingyas, in defending them.
I have always defended those whose human rights have been attacked. But what people want is not defense but condemnation. Particularly, they're saying, why am I not condemning this group, or why am I not condemning that group? And it also applies to the military. Why am I not condemning the military? I'm not condemning because I have not found that condemnation brings good results. What I want to do is to achieve national reconciliation. It's very interesting. In those days, back from 1988 until a year or two ago, when the military regime was very, very severe, and when we talked about national reconciliation, everybody agreed because they thought it was not achievable. But now, when we talk about national reconciliation in very, very simple, practical terms of trying to work out our differences instead of condemning one another, then people don't like it. So there's an inconsistency. When they thought national reconciliation was just a pipe dream, they were ready to support it. But now many who supported national reconciliation as a goal do not seem to be very keen on practicing national reconciliation, which means, as I said, trying to sort out our differences without resorting to condemnation or violence.
Do you think that reconciliation requires offering the Rohingyas citizenship as Rohingyas?
Reconciliation requires talking to both communities, finding out what their fears are. I believe that hate and fear are linked. They are opposite sides of the same coin. And as long as there's hate and fear, there cannot be reconciliation. There cannot be a sorting out of the differences without violence. Violence comes out of hate and fear.
The citizenship laws are an important point, though.
Of course, this is why I say that these should be discussed sensibly, with cool heads, and not out of fear or not out of hate.
In relation to Australia, there is this young child, Farouz, a boy that was born a short time ago. He was separated from his mother a few days after his birth, and the family, we understand, may be sent to Nauru or to Papua New Guinea, countries that we have agreements with for accepting asylum seekers. Do you think that that's appropriate for Australia to send this child away when he's ill, when the family has come and tried to seek asylum here?
Do you have rule of law in Australia?
We do.
Well, in that case, you must sort out these problems within the framework of rule of law, but always remembering that justice has to be tempered by mercy.
In a moment, we'll take some questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, please move to one of the 6 microphones around the auditorium. I'll give you a few moments to do that. So please get your questions ready. We need some light. The lights will come up in a moment. I suppose we talked about your readiness potentially to become the president. Do you think that the military is ready for you?
They had better be, the sooner the better.
All right, let's take some questions. I'll go to microphone 1 first. I'll take 3 questions. Please keep them brief so that we can get through as many as possible. So we'll listen to the first 3 questions and then answer them all at once.
Good evening and welcome to Australia. I wanted to ask a question about sanctions. You may know that amongst all of the groups that were campaigning for democracy in Burma, there was a lot of a discussion and conflict about this issue of whether constructive engagement was the way forward or whether support for sanctions was the way forward. And that's still contested even today. Could you tell us what your views are on the role of sanctions and constructive engagement and what role they played towards the liberalisation that we're seeing now in Burma?
Well, let me just concentrate on sanctions, because I supported sanctions. I didn't get them instituted because I didn't lobby for sanctions, but once sanctions were in place, I supported sanctions. And I do believe sanctions have had a role to play in the democratization process as it is. Now, I say this because I'm sure many of you are aware of the fact that dictators end up always believing their own propaganda. And in Burma, for a long time, the economy had been in a terrible situation. To begin with, when sanctions were first instituted, the military government, the then military government, said that sanctions had no effect whatsoever on the country. In fact, I think there was a television program. Every day they had some popular singer singing about how useless the sanctions were. But after some time, when the economy started getting from bad to worse, they started saying that it was because of sanctions. Now, if I remember correctly, the IMF brought about several reports to the effect that sanctions had not really affected the economy much. It was because of mismanagement that it was in such a mess. But I think the military regime started believing their own propaganda, that sanctions are responsible for the economic mess, and they became very, very eager for sanctions to be removed. And I think some of the positive steps they took were related to their desire to have sanctions removed. Now, those of you who are worried because sanctions have now been removed and think that this leaves them with very little with which they can exercise leverage, must be much more positive in their thinking. I think it was time for sanctions to be removed in order to give our people the best opportunities possible, and also for the government to understand that it was not because of sanctions that our economy was in trouble, but because of mismanagement, and these things that needed to put right would have to be put right as soon as possible. So please don't worry because sanctions have not been lifted. What is needed for us now is, as I said earlier, constitutional amendments and not sanctions.
Let's go to microphone 2. And could I just ask you to introduce yourself at the beginning?
Yes, my name is Kerry Wright and I'm an educator. And I just wanted to say, as an educator, I have taught about you, spoken about you and thought about you every day for decades. What I would like to say, because you're a very practical woman, is that in our free land here with very privileged education, and like many people in this room, I've seen many of your schools in Burma, I've spoken to many of your teachers, including teachers teaching in the most incredibly difficult circumstances, but very nobly. What I would like to ask you is, in our free land, where Australians, Burmese, Chinese, Tibetans and every other great nation represented here, and religion, what can we do, every student, every teacher, every school, every institution, to practically support the rebuilding of your whole education system?
as you said, we have so much to do in our country. We have an education network set up by my party, which has set up free schools all over the country. Now, when I say free schools, some of you might be surprised, some of you who think that education is free, provided freely by the state in Burma. In fact, it's supposed to be free, but it's not free. Students are required to make, in quotes, donations. And these donations are beyond the reach of the poorer people who therefore don't send their children to the state schools. So we need not just more money, which we do for education, but we need a more responsible government that will lay down a national education plan that will help us to start again from scratch almost, because at one time we had the best education system in Southeast Asia, and now it's about the worst. The legislature is working on a national education scheme, and I'm the chair of the committee that is drafting the higher education law. But legislation is not enough. We need the executive also to work hard at improving education in Burma. And what you can do as Australian teachers, Australian students, is to get as much in contact with our education networks as possible and to help in every way you can until the government-to-government relationship is established on a truly democratic basis.
Thank you. Let's go to the far back corner there and microphone number 3.
Aung San Suu Kyi, thank you very much for being here with us this evening in Sydney. My name is Dean Bialik. I work with the Diplomatic Advisory Group, Independent Diplomat. And my question for you is, do you expect the elections in your country in 2015 to be free and fair? And what can the international community do to ensure that they are as free and fair as is humanly possible?
Well, there are two parts to it, free and fair. Now, free in the sense that voting is free on the day of polling itself, I think that we can depend on more than 90%. But fair, we cannot have fair elections until the Constitution is amended, because the Constitution does not provide for a level playing ground. I don't want to go into the details, but in that section, which was written up with me in mind, it's very flattering actually. I must be the only person in the world for whom a constitution was written. But that section effectively rules out any woman, not just me, from becoming president, because it requires the candidate to have military experience. We do not have women in the Burmese army at the moment, though I understand that they're now going to start taking women into the Defense Service Academy. So to begin with, a woman can't become a president. And then, of course, I'm doubly debarred because of my sons who are not Burmese citizens. So how can you say that a constitution that does not give a fair chance to women, although it says in another section that there should be no discrimination on the grounds of gender, how can you say that such a constitution would lead to fair elections? And then also the Election Commission, as appointed under the terms of the Constitution, is totally in the hands of the executive. It is the president who appoints the chairman of the commission, and I suppose he selects other members as well, since he's already selected the chairman. So we cannot have fair elections in 2015 if the Constitution is not amended. But possibly there could be free voting on the day of polling itself.
Well, let's turn to microphone 4.
Minglaba Misu, Siniani Roma Jozawaraknya. My name is Osman Ma, and I'm from Burmese Muslim community here in Australia. And apparently my question will be around the recent religious tension in Burma, particularly the religious violence against Muslim minority group in Burma. Do you think these recent violence and unrest and tension between these different religious groups are actually plots by the current government against you and your party to politically assassinate you destroy your political cause? If you think so, what you and your parties are doing to defuse the situation? And when you talk about national reconciliation, does this also cover, reconciliation between different religious groups? Because I think at the moment there are some, fear against each other and mistrust against each other between like the different religious groups. And what do you think, a country like Australia can do to help, calm the situation? So sorry to ask you too many questions, but
Right. Well, Burma is not yet, as I said earlier, a country where transparency is overwhelming. It's not totally transparent, and it's not totally open. And because of that, there are always many conspiracy theories. I know that there have been speculation with regard to why these communal violence has been taking place, the communal riots and the tension, whether these have been promoted by those who wish to derail the 2015 elections or to make sure that the NLD does not win the 2015 elections. But these are just speculation. There is no solid evidence that any particular group is working towards such an end. On the other hand, there's no evidence either that any particular group is not working towards such an end. So we have to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. But what is important is that the government must take responsibility for any violence that takes place in the country, anything that happens that is contrary to the laws of the land. As I said earlier, I do not think that the government has taken enough responsibility with regard to that. And certainly when I talk about national reconciliation, I mean reconciliation among all groups, among all peoples, among organizations, among political forces. This is why I say that when I think of national reconciliation, I include reconciliation between the military and the civilian political forces everywhere. But in order to promote this kind of national reconciliation, we need not just Australia, but the world to give us more understanding. This is why I said earlier that behind all these communal tensions are great fears and hatred. And to remove these, the government must create an atmosphere of security. If people do not feel secure, you will not be able to make them let go of their hatred and their fear. So I want our people to live in peace. We have not forgotten, I have not forgotten certainly, that we achieved our independence in 1948 through reconciliation between different ethnic nationalities, with the involvement of different religious groups, with the involvement of different political organizations. It was through national solidarity that we achieved our independence. And I believe that it is only through national solidarity that we will be able to achieve true democracy for our country. So Australia and the rest of the world must try to help us to achieve this reconciliation. They must also remind the present government that it is responsible for peace and rule of law in our country. If they want us to be responsible, they'd better make us government.
Just on further to that question, Human Rights Watch described that violence as ethnic cleansing. Do you accept that analysis of it?
No, I think these kind of expressions do not help, because it does intensify fears and hatreds. Yes, there has been violence, and there is continuing violence, and there is great anxiety in our country that these outbreaks of communal tension and strife should come to an end. But when you use terms like ethnic cleansing, which I think is a little extreme, it just plays into the hands of extremists. There are extremists on both sides. They're very few. It's usually the minority. We only have very few extremists, but they can exercise great power over those who are frightened.
Let's turn around. I think there's a microphone 5 over here.
Susan Banky, the University of Sydney. Thank you, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. I'd like to return to the question of women. As you know, you are the best known of a number of remarkable women leaders from Burma. Dr. Cynthia Maung, Charm Tung, and what we understand, at least in the Western world, is that you come from a male-dominated society. And yet we see this amazing number of women leaders. And I'm wondering if there's a reason that Burma has produced this wealth of women leaders despite the fact that it's a male-dominated society. Thanks.
Well, the fact that it's a male-dominated society doesn't mean that our men are stronger than the women. I think it just means that the women are kinder.
Let's go over to microphone 6.
Hello. What is it? Hi. Sorry, I forgot.
Do you want a minute to think?
In Burma,
He's a man, he needs time to think.
Sorry. In Burma, we have a conflict between Buddhist majority, 96%, and Muslim minorities, 4%. So there are continuing conflicts. And in previous interview, you said that there are fears on both sides. And there are the lack of rule of laws, and the government is responsible, and they need to implement it. But that's one side. And your mother soon, and you are the only hope and inspirations for all our Burmese people. And may I ask that have you been implementing, or do you have any plan to promote peaceful coexistence of all people inside Burma, regardless of race or religions? Thank you very much.
Well, we have been doing this over the last 30 years because, as I said, we started out with 3 pillars: democracy, human rights, and national reconciliation. If all these 3 could be constructed strongly, then we would have peace and harmony in our land because human rights would be respected, everybody would enjoy their democratic rights, and there would be understanding between different communities, between different races. And now at the moment, as the chair of the Committee for Rule of Law, I'm trying my best to build a harmonious society through rule of law. And while I'm about it, could I say that we're trying to establish rule of law centers all over the country, and that will require a lot of help in services as well as in funding. So anybody who would like to help with the establishment of rule of law in Burma, please get in touch with my committee through the legislature. Thank you.
Thank you, amazing.
Yes.
I think that offer was well directed at the faculty staff back there.
Well, not just that. As I say, it's not services, just services. We want funding as well. I don't think faculty staff are particularly
the politicians are down
so
that
I
way.
look at this direction.
Let's return to microphone 1.
Thank you very much. My name is Bei Bei Hu. I'm a Chinese Australian who came to Australia when I was 14 years old, and I'm inspired by your story of your choices that you have made based on the strength and the humility that you have. My question is, what kind of words, what would you say to a young girl who's unborn at the moment, and also to the people of your country, to inspire them with the same level of humility and strength that you have inspired the rest of the world to reconciliate? Because clearly this is an issue that came up so many times within this forum, and also many people have the same question as well. It's not just amongst the Muslims and the Buddhists, but also amongst many other groups that have different interests.
Well, this morning, when I was meeting the Burmese community, there was a welcome to country performance of song and dance, and I was presented with a little carving, I think of a crocodile, if I'm not mistaken. And I was told that this was to wish me peace and love. And I thought, well, this is all we need really in this world. Peace and love, if this is to be a world where we can be safe and happy. And so what would I say to your unborn child, if it's a girl, or if it's a boy, that peace and love is something towards which every human being should work. If we all put peace and love as at the top of our list of choices, then I think we would all be very much happier. This world would be much happier. Now, you may think that this is very idealistic, that this is not possible, but it is possible because many of my colleagues have worked like that. They have put peace and love above everything else. Not love for themselves and their families. Now, love has to be a lot wider than that. And love has to be expressed in action. There are many people who say that they love somebody or some bodies or some country, but actually their actions do not reflect their words. So you must teach your little girl. Is this your little girl you're talking about? Yes. Or you must teach your little girl to work towards peace and love, not just for herself, but for the world in which she lives. And it's not idealistic and it's not impossible. We have known people who put that as the most important part of their lives and successfully brought more peace and love to our world. And that is how justice comes, that is how harmony comes, and that is how progress comes.
We'll take one last question from microphone 2.
Hello. Minglaba Dosu. 25 years, long time no see Dosu. We met one day, student leader and your 5 leaders. Bojo, General Utin Boyanai, you, and Aung. And one of the things I remember, Boyanai told us, Tado look at her, Tado shake and take her, or Lula Babi, Apollo Dicata Mass will be not so Tado Ditola Gade. Dear, my adorable political adopted mother, and dear our giant leader, Dosut, I would like to say first thing, I have 3 things to propose and ask the question. Before I go further,
Could I beg you to ask the question, because we've got 2 minutes before we finish.
Yes, I understand that, but because we haven't met for 25 years. That's a long time. So that's a question. I'm trying to cut it short. So I would like to say thank you for your scholarship support from Professor Burma. I am from Rangoon Institute of Technology. I left Burma 5th year electrical power engineering. I completed my degree in Australia at Monash University in Bachelor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Engineering degree for your support. Without support, I couldn't buy lunchbox or I couldn't buy computer. By the way, I go to the point. I have 3 points to raise. First thing, I would like to raise about the health system in Burma. Two of my parents, they passed away by malaria disease. They live in Rangoon. My family impact the way I involved in politics. My father was as a bank manager deported to China-Burma border, got malaria. But both of my parents passed away by malaria disease. My question is, what kind of health system? We also get a bit of experimental by Thai medicine, quinine, something like that in Burma at the border as well. What kind of health system we need to implement? What kind of support you need from that?
Let's just leave it at the one question then. So the health system for Burma, what's required?
All right. Well, first of all, let me tell you that Uncle U Tin U is at 87, is hale and hearty, and he saw me off at the airport. Now, and secondly, about the health system. Of course, the whole thing needs to be reformed. We need a lot more funding for health. We do not have enough, not enough of the budget is devoted to health and education. At the moment, we as the NLD have a health network, and we go out to the people and give them the kind of help that they need as far as possible. But the whole system needs to be reformed. Again, as I must remind you, we're not yet the government.
Let's finish with 2 very brief questions. some universals. What do you think is the greatest challenge facing the world today?
Greed.
And finally, what gives you hope?
I've always said that I don't believe in hope without endeavor. I think you have the right to hope only if you work hard to realize your hopes.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Aung San Suu Kyi. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to meet you. Thank you. Please stand up. Please take it.